Hi there, welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be talking about painting cats, one of my favorite things to do. This video is going to be jam-packed with resources and tips, including how to choose a reference photo, how to compose your painting, and I'm also going to talk about the paint colors I use, how to paint really good whiskers, how to paint really good cat eyes, and some resources and tips and some of my favorite supplies too. Also, remember, if you would like to learn from me more closely and more in-depth tutorials and real-time videos, then be sure to check out my Patreon, which is only $5 a month. Okay, let's get started with tip number one. Tip number one is to use a good reference photo, and sometimes a lot of you guys might be doing commissions, so that's kind of impossible. But if you have the luxury of choosing your own reference photo, try to find one that has really good light. Let's look in more detail about what makes a good picture for painting a cat. First of all, look for a picture that was taken with good light, which usually means natural light. Even better, that golden hour light, but any kind of light, especially if you have indoor cats or you're painting a reference photo. A lot of times cats like to sit by windows. That makes the most beautiful light. The worst light is flash lighting, and let me show you a few pictures of my cat Sadie. And I took this one picture of her that says bad with a flash just for this video, just to show you why it's bad. First of all, you can't see her eye color because she's all zombied out looking, and it flattens her out in that she's equally light on this side as on this side. So it doesn't give her any dimension or shape in space. So when you use a flash, it kind of flattens out your subject, and it just doesn't lend itself well to being a good reference photo. Then the next picture is better light. At least it wasn't taken with a flash, but still it's kind of dark and you can't really see all the details in her fur, especially since she's a black cat. Then this next picture is really the best one. I took this picture of her by a window where you can really see the contours of her face, and the light is coming from kind of one side of her, so it just gives her a little bit more interesting dimension and depth. Another thing you want to do when you're looking for a good reference photo is to find a picture that has good negative space. What does that mean, negative space? The negative space is all the area around me, and then this part, if you were painting me, this is not negative. So it's all the air basically around the main subject. So let's look at a couple pictures to illustrate this. Okay, the first picture is again my cat Sadie, which she's loving this, you guys. Trust me, she loves to be in videos. But as you can see, this picture is kind of just her, this blob of round, and it's kind of good. I mean, the lighting's good and everything, but there's not a lot of angles that creates an interesting negative space around her. It's all just an even round oval shape that makes up the cat. And then look at this other picture. There are so many interesting angles. Her ears make this interesting angle, and then her tail comes out, and then just the way that she's sitting, there are interesting curves that show her haunches and then her chest area, and then her fur is jagged against, or the lightness of the floor. And so there's a lot more interesting negative shapes in that reference photo. So be sure to look at your reference photo in terms of shapes in the negative areas. Also, you want to find a really good angle, especially when you're painting cats. Usually the worst angle is from, and this happens all the time with people who aren't photographers, they stand above their cat, maybe a little far away, like in this picture, and this is a horrible picture of Sadie. She does not look good. She does not want me to show you guys this picture of her because she doesn't look good. She looks like a blob, and it's a weird angle. You can't really see her face very well, and the negative space around her is not interesting. So let's look at some angles that are good. Usually the best angles are from eye level. So let's look at these next pictures. So when in doubt, get on eye level. This is a great picture. She's in a cute pose. She's in beautiful light, and we're on almost a little bit below eye level, really, which is kind of an unexpected angle to take a picture of a cat. And I find actually what another angle that looks really good to me is completely above the cat and they're looking up at you. That can be kind of a cute angle because it kind of tells a story of a cat looking at you like, you're gonna feed me, right? Okay, so let's look at this next picture of Sadie. This is also really good because the light is good and we're almost a little bit below eye level again. So it's a unique, interesting angle that will make for a more interesting painting. P.S. you guys, there are tons of great free reference photos. There are several Facebook groups and more popping up where you can use the reference photos in these groups specifically for artists. So if you go on Facebook and do a search, reference photos for artists, look around, you will see several groups. And in those groups, there are pictures of all kinds of different things, including cats. So I will put a link or two of my favorite groups down below. Okay, another tip I have is to pick a reference picture that tells a story. It doesn't always have to. Maybe you want to do a classic portrait looking painting, but if you want to have a little fun, you can tell a little tiny bit of a story like, this cat loves to sit in the window and watch birds. It's not a complicated story, but it is a bit of a story. It's usually a cat enjoying his cat life to the fullest. Let's look at some examples. So these are several of my paintings that I've done that kind of tell a story. A cat on a heater, a cat warming himself under a lamp, a cat walking on a fence, probably on a farm somewhere, a cat in a shopping bag. I mean, they kind of have a little bit of whimsy and a little bit of humor too that can really add a nice element to your painting to just add one more level of interest. Okay, another thing you want to think about before you even start painting is think of your composition and where you want the eye to go. You want to keep the area of interest, usually the cat's face, the place where you have the brightest whites and also the most detail. Then the soft areas in the painting will help the eye move around the painting back where you want the attention to go. So usually you do want the viewer's eye to focus in on the face and the eyes, especially if you're painting some beautiful eyes, which cats so often have. Okay, the next tip that I have for you is to transfer your image, especially if you're a new artist and you are not great at drawing yet. You'll get there, and the more you paint, the better your drawing skills will be. So even if you trace your image, you're still going to have to use a ton of drawing skills once you get your image traced and transferred onto your paper. But painting and drawing are two different skills, and it's a little overwhelming, especially if you're a beginner, to try to do the drawing and to do the painting. If you're doing a more whimsical or comical style, then, you know, this doesn't apply. But if you're painting cats and you want to get a somewhat realistic representation of the cat that you're painting, then don't feel bad about tracing. A lot of artists do it. Professional artists do it. I learned to trace from an art magazine that is for professional artists. So professional artists do it too. And it's a huge time saver. There are lots of YouTube videos out there on how to trace, but here are a few ideas for how to transfer your image. Okay, one way that I sometimes transfer an image, especially if I'm working in a large scale, is I use a projector. And here is me and my studio assistant, Kitty, Sadie, using a projector. And I'm going to show you my projector too. And the projector that I like to use is an Optima ML750 LED projector. And it's a less expensive model because I don't use it a lot. Projectors can get really expensive. And so here I am also doing another kind of transfer technique where I trace my image in Photoshop and then I print it out and then I will trace it on the window. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, you can just print out your image. And if you're doing a larger image, what I used to do is I would print out sections of the image, tape them together, and then trace them on a light box or on a window. Another way that you can transfer your image is to use a grid system where this is really pretty much drawing. And there's also YouTube videos out there on how to do this, and it's beyond the scope of this video because it would take a long time for me to explain it. It can be relaxing if you embrace it. Okay, tip number 4 is keep the background and the areas that are less of interest soft. How do I keep my painting soft? I pre-wet my paper for most of the areas that I paint. But especially for fur, and especially for the first or second layer, you want to work wet and wet. What is wet and wet? It's when you moisten your paper with clear water and then you go in with paint. In this little video clip I'm showing you, I'm putting in this cat's fur that's along his back, and what I really loved about especially this cat is I used a lot of water in this area, and then I went in with cream consistency paint on my paintbrush and dropped in some really dark passages of fur, and that really came out well. And here on this black cat, I'm using lamp black and ultramarine blue. And then in this next little clip, I'm showing you how I paint stripes. And I did a whole video very recently on how to paint stripes. And I'm using that same technique here in cat fur. And it's basically a very wet and wet technique where you moisten the paper and then you go in with cream consistency paint on your paintbrush to create stripes that are really soft and flowy, but also have an interesting fur texture just because of the way watercolor paint and water interact. P.S. This cat will be one of my next Patreon tutorials. So when I painted the stripes in this particular painting, I was using a combination of lamp black, quinacridone gold, and burnt sienna. A little bit of ultramarine blue and sometimes some indigo blue. I keep the colors dynamic in stripes like these by constantly changing the color, sometimes a lot and sometimes just a little in my brush with each brush stroke, or at least every other brush stroke, so that the fur has a life of its own. If you paint a whole cat with just lamp black or a whole brown cat with just burnt sienna, it's going to be really flat. So fur has a lot of dimension and colors in the fur. And so you want to be sure that you are using a few different colors in the fur to make it more interesting. If the paper dries too much using this technique, you can spray it a little bit with a little spray bottle. And then if it gets too wet, you can sop up a little bit with a mop brush or a brush that you might have that is good at absorbing extra water. For the darker stripes in this Bengal cat, I used cream consistency paint. Even in areas with smaller stripes, you can use a wet and wet technique to keep it really soft and really a lot more poetic looking. Since we're on the subject of keeping everything soft, let's talk a little bit about using masking when you're painting cats. What I have found is that when you use mask in the fur of the cat, on the main body of the cat, a lot of times it's going to look really stilted and require a lot of scrubbing. So if you do this technique, if there are little glints of white fur in your cat's coat that you're painting and you feel like you need to do it, just remember to keep those masking lines really refined and make sure the ends of each of them have a sharp edge on them and they're not blunt and stubby, because every little detail will show. When you remove that masking, it will be this bright white, whatever it is that you masked. So 9 times out of 10, I have to soften what I masked with my scrubber anyway. So just keep that in mind. Masking is best used for small little details like the whiskers, for the little glint in the eye, and sometimes the little hairs in the ear. Okay, tip number 5 is you want to think about backgrounds. I know, backgrounds are the banes of most of us artists' existence. I don't know why they're so hard. They're harder to do than the cat. Definitely, I feel ya. I'm there with ya. So I wanted to give you guys a little gift and give you a few ideas of how to do a successful background without having a heart attack. So here we go. One thing you definitely want to keep in mind when you're painting a background is to keep it as soft as possible. Almost always paint wet and wet in your background. And here I'm painting some leaves, and I was able to have enough control of my paint to imply leaves, but they're soft enough that they don't draw the attention away from the cat. Also, whenever possible, try to connect the cat to the background. How do you do that? By having a soft edge between the cat and the background. And if you haven't watched my video on soft edges, do that straight away, because it will explain all about how to do soft edges. Okay, can you guys see where I attached him to the background? A little bit here. There's soft edges kind of everywhere, but here the stripes run right into the background, and here too. And it just adds a little poetry, and it makes it look like the cat isn't so much a cutout. So just remember, and especially in less important areas of the cat, like this is a less area of importance. It's in shadow anyway, so just let it blend into the background. The more you can do that, the more professional your painting's going to look. Edges really help painting look more professional, especially soft edges. Background that I often use is a soft abstract background, and these are fun to do, they're easy to do, and they're not too complicated, and you do want to keep it really simple because the cat needs to be the star of the show, just like in real life. So what you do for this kind of background is you get the whole background pretty wet, and then you just drop in larger areas of different colors. Like in this painting I had lamp black, ultramarine blue, Windsor purple, and then mix them around a little bit. And it does take some practice, and you can think of composition like you can have some passages kind of leading down to the cat, kind of pointing into the cat. Sometimes I try to do that. A lot of times I'll get the upper left and right corner extra dark, just because it kind of creates a frame around the cat, like almost like a halo, because you know they're such angels, right? Yeah. Another tip about backgrounds to keep in mind is, for example, if you have a dark cat, you need a light background. If you have a light cat, you need a dark background. Another great way to create a beautiful background that hangs well together with the cat is to use some of the colors that are in the cat's eyes in the background. That almost always works really well. Okay, tip number 6. Cats need jewelry too. It's not just us. They want it. They're divas. Not too much. What is jewelry? Like I explained in my horse painting tutorial, and a lot of other tutorials probably too, the jewelry are just those final little touches, usually very small little details that really make a painting sing. Somehow they just really bring a painting to life. And a lot of times what the jewelry is in a cat painting are the whiskers, or the glint in the eye, or little fur edge along the side of the cat that is getting hit by the light. And just like jewelry, you don't want to overdo it. If you put too many whiskers, too many glints in the eye, it just won't look right. It'll be overwhelming. Just like if you wear too much jewelry, you wear the earrings and the bracelets and too many rings on each finger, it just looks overwhelming. It doesn't look good. Tip number 7 is going to be all about whiskers. Whiskers are so important. And the finer you can get them and the more perfect you can get them, the more beautiful your painting's going to be. One thing you want to keep in mind is to try to keep them as fine as possible. So use your smallest rigger brush when you're applying that mask. One tool you can try is this. You can make it wider or thinner, and you can get really thin little details using this. You just dip it right in your mask and then draw the whiskers with this. Also, I did a whole video tutorial on art supplies that I like to use with cats. So be sure to refer to that, and I'll link it right up here. Also, another tip for painting whiskers is be sure you get that curve. And sometimes you have to change the orientation of your painting, like literally, so it goes with the sweep of your arm so that you can get a really nice curve. So get a really nice curve in the whiskers, and don't put too many. And remember, a few come out of the same little area, so that can always look good. And I like to contrast the curve of the whiskers with 1 or 2 straight whiskers. And usually cats have lots of curved whiskers and 1 or 2 straight ones, so it's kind of realistic too. Another art supply that you can use when you're painting your whiskers in is a gel pen. And this is something that's relatively new to me as well, but I've gotten good results with this. And in the end, if you want to refine your whiskers even more, you can use a gel pen to really make those whiskers shine. One thing to keep in mind is if you did mask the whiskers, which usually you probably will, you want to go in and soften them after you take the masking off, and usually especially where the whiskers meet the face, you're gonna want to scrub a little bit because there will be a hard edge where the end of the mask is, and you need to softly scrub that with a scrubber brush. A lot of times I'll also scrub along the whiskers to soften them a little bit, and sometimes I'll also paint in between the whiskers in the negative space to further refine the whiskers and make them even thinner. Another thing some artists do is they will use a pin or something sharp to actually scratch in lines like whiskers. So you can try that too. I never do that. It always scratches my paper in the wrong way, and I probably just need to practice. Another way to apply whiskers is with gouache, and a lot of artists do this as well. But for me, I just don't think they come out bright enough, and I like my whiskers really white. I really like them to pop, so I usually don't use gouache. And I will use gouache sometimes at the end of my painting to add little details, little lighter details, but just know they won't be perfectly white. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're painting whiskers, some are going to be bright white and some are going to be a little bit in the shadow of the cat. So be sure to look at your reference photo and try to vary the brightness of your whiskers. Okay, tip number 8 is all about supplies, and I did a whole video about supplies, so I'm not going to talk a lot about my favorite supplies, but one thing that's really important to remember is to always buy really good watercolor paper. I see this in the forums a lot where beginner artists are like, well, once I get better, I'll get good paper. Once I'm better, I'll get good paint. But the experience you're going to have painting watercolor is going to be a lot better if you at least get good quality paper. I like Arches 140-pound cold press paper. That's what I use. It's not the most expensive, it's not the cheapest, but it will allow you to scrub, it will allow you to get layers of color that are subtle and blending effects that you just can't get with cheaper paper. So good quality watercolor paper is a must. You're gonna think you're a bad artist, but really it's not you, it's your paper if you don't use good quality paper. So be sure to do that. One other art supply that I want to talk about is my Wisp brush, which I use a ton. I'm using it here. If you Google Royal and Langnickel Wisp brush, you'll find it, and here's a few different sizes, and they do come in a lot of different sizes and shapes, so there's a lot of variety out there of what you can use. And I often use the Wisp brush in a couple different orientations. I'll use the side to get really thin long lines and then flat to get fur textures. Okay, tip number 9, my favorite colors. Now, keep in mind, here's a pro tip. It matters less what colors you use than the tone or the lightness and darkness you use in your paintings. A lot of beginning artists, they don't get their darks dark enough. So just be sure you're getting your darks dark enough. Color matters less. But that being said, I do have some favorite go-to colors that I don't think I could live without, and those include burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. One of the reasons is, look at all the different colors you can achieve with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Look at all the browns and grays they create. And also, just to show you, you can get a really dark, almost black color by painting thick burnt sienna and ultramarine blue together, and they create a really nice black. So use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna together to create a good black color as well. Another color that I like a lot is Winsor Violet. And here I'm going to show you all the different colors you can create when you mix burnt sienna and Winsor Violet together. And they also make a really nice black. And here I'll show you the black that you can create with those two colors. My favorite eye color paints include Winsor Green Gold, gotta have that one, Permanent Green Light, Quinacridone Gold, Ultramarine Blue, Cobalt, Cerulean, and Permanent Green Light. Okay, the tip all of you guys have probably been waiting for, how to paint good eyes. There's so many things to go over. I could probably make a whole 10-minute video just on how to paint cat eyes. And the first thing I want you to think about when you're painting cat's eyes is think about them as paintings in and of themselves. They have their own composition. They have lights, mediums, and darks in them. And if they don't, they're not gonna look right. They have the white glint, and they have the soft areas, and they have the hard edges. And that's all within the little area of the eye. they should have more than one color. So for example, if you're painting an eye with cobalt blue, also put in some cerulean. A lot of times for Siamese cat eyes, I'll actually mix in a little bit of Winsor Violet to get the deeper passages of the eyes so that they have a lot more interesting variety to the colors in them. I always start painting my eyes after, of course, the masking dries for the little glint. Don't forget that. But then I go in and I moisten the whole area with clear water within the eye. I then drop in at least 2 different colors, and I'll often go back in with a scrubber to create even lighter passages that remain soft. And that's the beauty of using a scrubber. It creates soft edges. The last step when you're painting your eyes is usually to remove the mask and then make sure that your eyeliner is nice and dark. Another thing that you should think of is when you're painting eyes, again, they're like little mini paintings in and of themselves. And just like you wanted to attach your cat to the background, you want to attach the eyes to the cat. So what you want to do is try to have a soft edge. So a lot of times in the cat's eyes, this little area will have a dark area, and you can kind of attach the eye to the dark area maybe of the cat right here, and sometimes also in the corner of their eye right here. That can be a good opportunity to attach the eye to the painting by having a soft edge between those 2 edges. So you just have to look at your reference photo and look for an opportunity. Where can I attach this eye to the cat? You don't want your eyes to look like cutouts, that you want them to look like they're part of the cat. If you even want to go way next level, you can do that with the pupil of the eye. And that's just something that I've started just recently, and I really love how it makes the eye really come alive by having a dark area in the pupil and a lighter, softer edge of the pupil where it attaches to the iris of the eye. In this picture right here, I will zoom in for you right here, and you can look. See how I allowed the blue paint to seep into the iris of this cat, and just look how alive that makes that eye look. It just adds a bit of life to the cat's eyes somehow. So if you can do that, you'll have a much more successful looking eye. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that gave you a lot of ideas on how to improve your cat paintings, or even how to get started. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. So leave me a comment about some of your favorite techniques for when you paint cats, or ask questions. I always answer questions. I'm really good at that. So without further ado, I think next we will let Sadie have her last word. She always has to have it. So take it away, Sadie. Okay, bye you guys.